solutions. And first is to use international law. And international law can serve as a mediating concept to mitigate the dilemmas of the rule of law raised by successor regime, and it was used starting with the Nuremberg trials in order to, well, against concerns of retroactivity. As we all know, at Nuremberg there were two types of completely new crimes invented there. First was the problem that since until Nuremberg, only state were to be punished and not individuals for starting a conflagration. And the second one was crimes against humanity, which was a completely new category of crimes. But although today we are referring to Nuremberg, well, a model of evoking natural law, it wasn't like this. What they tried to do was to find a legal base in international law. So, for example, for starting the conflagration, the Allies evoked the 1982 Brianke-Lok Pact, according to which wars were not run by states as abstract entities, but by individuals. And also, in what concerns the crimes against humanity, they tried to find correspondences in the 1922 statute of the Permanent Court of International Justice. So these were, of course, interpretable, debatable interpretation, and this was one of the main critiques of the trials, that they relied on ex post facto law. International law was also evoked in various domestic accountability cases in Latin America, and for example, one of the most famous was the cancel of the Pinochet's regime auto-amnesty, evoking the United Nations Convention Against Torture. So after 20 years of impunity, finally Chile cancelled this amnesty, evoking this convention in order not to be accused of retroactivity. And for example, in Eastern Europe, also a Hungarian law defined the crimes committed in 56 as crimes against humanity. And they were punishable no matter, there was no statute of limitation, and they tried to evoke continuity in international legal norms, namely the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in times of war. And also Romania is an interesting case, because in Romania, until 2012, we never had crimes against humanity in the criminal code. Romania was part of several conventions, international conventions, but the communist regime, never introduced crimes against humanity in the criminal code. And the criminal code was changed in 2012, and crimes against humanity were introduced, and also we put in the criminal code the statement that they can be judged and punished no matter when they were committed. And the argument for this was the fact that Romania was part of the 1968 Convention on the non-applicability of statutory limitation for crimes against humanity. Okay, the second solution. Do I have still 5 minutes?
Yes, yes.
Yeah? Okay. A second solution was extending status of limitation, evoking the precedent law, and this happened a lot in Eastern Europe. It means that calling certain articles of the socialist criminal codes, several Eastern European countries extended status of limitation for various criminal acts, if due to political or other objective reasons, these crimes could not be investigated during the communist regime. So, in Romania, Bulgaria and Czech Republic, the statute of limitation for crimes committed on political grounds under the state's umbrella or under the state's coordination, so the statute of limitation for this crime started to was considered to be 1990. So, okay, it was like started in 1990, the status of limitation. So the motive evoked was that due to political influences, justice could not investigate and prosecute these crimes. But the same law, as I showed before, it was struck down by the Constitutional Court in Hungary. Poland, it's a more problematic case, where because statute of limitation were extended twice. In 1995, the law followed the same arguments like in Romania and in Czech Republic. And in 1999, when the Institute of National Memory was created with a special judicial section specialized in investigating communist crimes, the statute of limitation for these crimes was considered to be 2000. And the argument was that until the creation of the institute, prosecutors and victims could not have access to the archives of the Communist Party and its political police, so being thus in the impossibility to investigate and to find incriminating proofs for these crimes. And a third interesting solution, which was used in transitions after short dictatorial regimes, was to cancel the laws of the dictatorial regime and to judge according to the criminal code in force before the instauration of the dictatorship. And this was the case of Greece in 1974, after the colonels' rule. And one of the first measures of the transition was to adopt a parliamentary resolution according to which the colonels obtained the political power in 1967 through a coup d'etat and not through a revolution as they were sustaining. And since the colonels' advent to power was the result of a coup, the legal order of their regime was considered illegitimate and illegal. So the resolution re-empowered the former criminal code, which became the legal basis for judging the crimes committed during the dictatorship. So, just to conclude, in fact I don't have a conclusion, but what I saw that, for example, the best thing to do in Eastern Europe, for example, at least after during the transition from communism, the evoking principles of natural law for transitional justice. Well, although at a theoretical level it could be like very prolific, at a practical level, I believe that this approach can face a lot of criticism and can be unproductive, as it can be struck down, and when it is used for retroactive accountability, with the argument of rule of law understood as adherence to known and stable norm. So from my point of view, like the best solution, at least for Eastern Europe, was to make appeal to this alternative construction and somehow to use an extensive interpretation of the law in force at the time when the crimes were committed.
Thank you very much. Now the time is dedicated to some questions, and after those, we go for a break. I'm looking at Yana, for sure. Yes, something to say.
One question.
No, because the reason why I said it, because the two papers are somehow complementary, right?
Yeah.
And as Filippo's paper will probably somehow be related to Martin's, right? We'll see. You might be surprised.
You mentioned that use of international law could be welcomed in reconciling different aspects of natural and positive law. But do you think that international law could also work as a precursor for change in the national society? For example, in Spain, they adopted in 1980 La Ley de Amnesty law, which says that nobody will be punished for the crimes committed during the Franco regime. And we all know that international tribunals from ICC to ICDR said that amnesties are not valid. They go contrary to the basic notions of prohibition against humanity and so on. So what would be the role for international law to persuade authorities in such countries where they adopted formal or informal amnesties, as in Slovenia, for example?
I believe that the success of traditional justice stays more in the activism of domestic civil societies and actors than in international organisms. And I believe that domestic civil societies can use these international norms in order to change the national criminal codes, the national legal structure. But from my point of view, as for example, because you were talking about Spain, you see what happened in Spain with Garzón now, because he was trying to break impunity about Franco's crimes using international law, and in fact he was involved in, he was accused that he was
prosecuted because he overreached his competence.
Exactly, exactly. So from my point of view, it's more like we have to look more to domestic accountability and to domestic actors, which can use this international law in order to make progresses.
All right. Of course, the problem is if there is no critical mass or there is no critical support for that on the domestic level, then nothing can be eventually achieved. The international laws, I can see the way it was in my book, it's sort of like it can be used as a trigger, as a facilitator of this of these processes. But you're absolutely right. At the domestic level, there's nobody. There's a lack of support for this kind of measure. Nothing will be achieved.
So then, natural law is not only subject to be used as a principle, but as a utility or as a policy. We get into trouble with
I have a really point on that. I was wondering is that in terms of, because I think the transitional stuff is really interesting. I think it's interesting that we always use the term transitional justice, specifically transitional justice, and in a way I think it's probably to sort of mitigate against kind of post facto vindictiveness in a way, in terms of kind of dealing with mistakes in the past, so to speak. I don't really know the terminology, but I was wondering, is it perhaps something that could be dealt with out with the law? So I realise that in terms of kind of legislating into a vacuum, that's all very problematic if you take a positivist conception. Perhaps it's one of these situations that the law has to hold its hands up and say this is actually very difficult for us to do. Perhaps we have to do that sort of segue into put it in the hands of the executive and go, this is just simply how it's going to be here, so something like executive clemency or something like that. It's perhaps something that we just have to point to and say, do you know, the law just finds this really difficult to deal with, and instead of tying ourselves in knots, why don't we just hold our hands up and do it a different way? I was wondering if there was anything, any examples that spoke about accommodation out with the legal.
Oh, would you like this, or because this was also more like a comment, right?
Yeah, it's really more like a comment, but I was just wondering if there was any examples where the law was, in some of the examples that you gave, were like, we just can't accommodate this situation without doing a violence to our own normative character. It's perhaps just not a comment.
All right, but then we can maybe just move this debate to for you discussing the All right. You don't want to let us to go for coffee, man?
Actually, I've been trying to ask the question the last 3 times, but you can't see me.
All right. Oh, sorry.
So the question is, when there have been prosecutions using retroactive laws, how do they get around the problem that the person who has committed these crimes didn't know at the time that they were crimes, so they don't have a guilty mind? And normally we require in criminal law that the person has the intention to commit a crime, has a guilty mind. Where here, they cannot have a guilty mind because what they're doing is not a crime. Except if you go outside the law again and look in terms of natural law to see that they know that this is immoral.
Great action in terms of using.
Well, generally, retroactive law was used to prosecute, well, for example, in France, war criminals. So the accusation evoked natural law. And they didn't care, effectively, they didn't care about the argument of the defense regarding the retroactivity. They evoked natural law.
It seems like you disagree with that.
Sorry?
It seems like you disagree with that.
No, I do not disagree, but at the same time, it's also, we have to, I'm not sure that, I don't know how to mediate the need to punish with the need to have predictable law. So this is the main problem, and I didn't decide yet what is more important. I am for judicial accountability, more than for administrative accountability. But it is still a dilemma.
Of course, if I may add to that, I mean, the dilemma, you phrase it really nicely. I mean, we need to punish, but we don't have a legal basis, and yet we know that we need to punish because the act was objectively wrong. So they had a guilty mind, right? Only that in the positive law, only the positive law didn't contain such a rule, you know, such a norm that we could now use in order to punish. So we have this kind of a discrepancy between what we positified, between what we posited as a binding norm and what essentially is right or wrong. So, I mean, there are certain, I think all this prosecution of all these crimes against humanity, against the very basics of human dignity, they stem from the belief that there are certain acts are just wrong, universally, forever, if they are legislated or not. So they must have had, and of course they had, right, guilty mind. So,
by definition.
by definition, that's why there is no apple desire this time.
Sure. No, sorry for taking your time for coffee, but now you trigger me. I think that this is now a very important problem also on the international level. The conflict between rule of law in international arena and protection of human rights. How to put that together and what will win at the end, you know. So, for example, we have the Tadic case, where the Tadic lawyer even asked the court to investigate is that court established according to rule of law, because it was not established by the law, so it's against the rule of law. But on the other side, the court says, well, this cannot imply international law at all. This is only for national laws. So I think that this discussion will come more and more accurate in following years, and I think maybe it can also help you that Waldron write something about that. So.
Just one moment. I would like to ask Mr. Novak if it's his concept of inclusive moral cognition could fit in this.
Yes, that's to some extent derived from the Radberg's formula, and close to what Alexei is saying about his referring to Radberg, basically.
Just to conclude, what we've been saying in or these debates about human dignity and your debate about the prosecution of crimes against humanity, these all do assume something, certain premises, which are not completely rationalizable, right? As like human dignity, like the question whether they had a guilty mind or not, it's something as working with safety. You better believe it. It's there, but it's difficult to articulate it, but you better believe it.
He fits in that picture.
If it's in the picture.
Maybe it would be fine to say that they should have had a guilty mind, even
Yeah.
certain principles.
Yes.
Even if de facto they didn't.
Exactly, but then the question will of course pose, how do we know that? Where do we get this from? They should have had it, right? And then, the only reply to this is just objectively wrong. And how do you know it? We have to take it for granted. We take this truth
That's
to be, universal, and we
Very well serious.
We don't have to take it for granted. We can reason to the fact that it's wrong to kill someone.
Right, but there will always be disagreement, right? There will always be disagreement.
With people who are wrong.
Sorry?
With
But you must, what I'm saying, you must have a preconception of the right. There must be the right and the
I'm saying
truth
we can
from which to
reason our way
proceed.
that.
From
I'm
which to
saying that's
proceed. Because if you don't have it, then you just cannot, convict somebody to something which wasn't legislated, right? Because he would just say, well, it might not be good. It was bad, but that's a question of utility. But we cannot argue whether it was right or wrong, because there might be many conceptions of the right or wrong. So deep down, there is this natural law through which we all proceed somehow. You better believe it. And I have to say that in order to justify the title of the conference. It's very utilitarian use of natural law this time. Okay, let's go for a go.
Yeah.